Sometimes Ryan will
Oh,
leave
yes.
like where it'll be an old game.
Right, right. I've done that too when I did my classes on here.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, there we are.
yeah,
I'm in
yeah.
mute. Classes on.
Yep.
That.
And then we give everybody a moment to populate. So we just shoot the breeze until they show up.
Good.
Yeah, I did tweet. I think people retweeted. I didn't check Twitter
I
today.
saw, and I retweeted it too.
Good.
I told some people about it.
Because I've had a few weeks off, kind of unannounced. I just didn't stream. Part of it was scheduling issues, and part of it was just bailing on Ryan last week.
Sure.
Which was funny.
Oh no.
Well, he apologized to me. He's like, I can't believe I forgot. I'm so sorry. I'm like, no, I purposely didn't remind you because I was swamped.
It's that time of year, right? And
I was giving a keynote last weekend, and I was like feeling behind on. I knew I was like almost done with it on Friday, but I'm like, if I take 2 hours away to stream, then I'm gonna be staying up so late. So, it worked really well.
It's not always just the 2 hours. It's the preparation. Well, I know when I stream, I have to gather myself, have a little bit of time before and after, and make sure everything's set. Yeah. I'm presenting next week, and I've been. This is a nice break from working on my presentation, but I'm doing Mammy next week. So.
Woo! Yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, so I'm doing a paper on space music. Specifically, I'm focusing on Super Metroid and what led us up to there in terms of timbre. I'm talking about the original Metroid, as well as classic film and Final Fantasy IV, when you go to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
My draft, I just finished the draft a week ago, and I'm speaking through it, and I got 30 minutes, and I'm like, oh no. Yeah. And I want to talk slower. So I had to cut a whole bunch. And just last night, I trimmed it down to a nice 15 minutes and recorded it. So I'm excited for that because people talk a lot about Final Fantasy and Zelda and Mario, and I don't hear enough about Metroid. Gibbons.
Yeah, I was going to say you're going to build it because Gibbons looked at the first one. I have Karen and I have a student, Hart, that is doing a chapter on Metroid in our gender book. Nice. But that's obviously a very different perspective than what you'll be doing.
Right.
But that's still original Metroid, not looking at Super Metroid. So. Sure. And I talk about Super Metroid like for a little bit in my disc because I talk about like the use of silence in the game.
I should bring that up.
For like uncanny creepiness.
Yes.
I can like send you the exact pages of it so you don't have to even
I think I read years ago, back when I was getting into this field. I was reading everyone's
I don't think it's of use to what you're doing because I don't think I really talk. I think I talk about things being unsettling, but I don't really talk about timbre specifically, even though that's a piece of it. But
I talk about texture and ambience and how so much of that game is atonal and amelodic. And it works beautifully because it's world building. That's what it's doing. It's building the world. And it comes out of my disc, actually. I did my PhD's in composition, so my disc didn't have to be that long. So I had to remove a lot. So I had a whole chapter about this that I was planning. And my supervisor said, you don't need that 100. He said 75 pages is enough. Mine's 100, whatever.
I'm surprised they had you take stuff out. You'd think if it's there, just leave it in. And it's a little longer and it's fine.
I think it's because it wasn't in great shape yet. And he's like, let's get this done, So it was a whole chapter I had planned for the dissertation that just, didn't really happen. So
best dissertation is a done dissertation, as they say.
Right.
So I'm seeing some folks in chat. So hello, friends. Welcome.
Hello, buddy.
So excited to be back with this. I've wanted to do this segment for a bit, to do kind of a non-traditional, although Gregg now has a publication. I wasn't sure if it was going to be out in time. I didn't know exactly when the JSMG was going to come out. So congrats on that. We can talk a little bit about that, but I don't have slides prepared on it because I just downloaded it. So we can talk a little bit about that. But today I wanted to do something about transcription. Such a useful skill. A lot of us are, in a space where we're working with games where there aren't published scores, and then you figure out, okay, am I going to go on like VG lead sheets, which is excellent, but it's not always what you need depending on how you're doing the analysis, right? And so there are a pocket of us that are very insistent on doing our own. And instead of just having me talk, I figured, why not get one of the other goats in this space to come on and just like, we'll have a chat as two very avid transcribers about what we do and how and everything. So welcome, Gregg Rossetti, everyone. Woo! Welcome. It's so good to have you.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, first of all,
Yeah.
let's go back to the origins, like what your gaming origins.
Sure. Well, my gaming origins are the NES, and the end of the NES. You know, I was like in kindergarten, and I always bring up the conversations, the school bus conversations when you're sitting next to kids, and they got the Nintendo, and they're talking to me about the games, and to tie it into music, it's the reason I became so interested in music is I wanted to make games. I'd sit there with my graph paper and I draw maps, I draw characters, and then I'm like, well, how do you do music? And my family were musicians, not professional, but they play. My dad plays guitar, my mom plays piano, and I played saxophone when I started 5th grade. But this was a little bit earlier, so I was like, well, how do I learn how to do music? So I was interested in the games. Played a lot of games as a kid. I wasn't into sports. I was into video games. That's what I did. And then basically around about 5th grade, like I said, is when I started playing music and understanding, I want to write music. And I learned how to read music by using Cakewalk, which is, now it's a digital audio workstation. Back then it was a MIDI editor. It was a terrible MIDI editor. You couldn't make the scores look beautiful like Sibelius and Finale. You would just, can plunk in notes. Mm-hmm. So I would write fake video game music. And I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know music theory. I didn't know anything. So I was I made up my own instruments. So I would open up a Barry sax sound and transpose it up 2 octaves. And I'd call it like the Gorschblitz. I'd make up some stupid name and just write some music for it. So it was around that time when I was really interested in RPGs. I loved Final Fantasy. I call it Final Fantasy 2. I know it's 4.
Sure.
But growing up, it was 2. I knew to retcon it.
For those of us that had the Super Nintendo, we had 2 and 3.
2 and 3. That's what it said when I turned the game on, Final Fantasy 2. And that game just kind of changed my life because I realized I love this music because it has such a rock influence. I was big into rock and metal, and my parents were hippies, so I knew all that music from the 60s. And, this was early 90s, so this is when Nirvana and Metallica were huge. So I had the grunge and the metal stuff all over the place. So I love that influence that I'm hearing in the RPG music. So I was learning. I'm a composer, like I mentioned. That's my background. My degrees are in composition. So I would try to learn how to write game music. And that ties into transcription. Is doing the transcriptions helped me understand what was going on, how the music was composed differently. And that I can go way off into that and about how the music had to be composed differently in order to deal with the restrictions. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my gaming history again is from old school, if you will, NES, Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, and then I skipped. I was mentioning earlier privately, like I skipped the N64. Like when that came out when I was in maybe 8th grade or high school, and I was too cool for video games then. So I played some computer games. I played like The Sims and everything, but then I skipped and Warcraft and everything. Mm-hmm. I skipped that. I was more interested in music, and I got back into gaming right after college. So
yeah, it's interesting when folks kind of get out of keeping up. Consoles are expensive to keep up with,
right?
And unless we're made of money,
Right. And it's also I'm still this way now. I'm still content with old games. They don't expire.
Right.
So like it was finals week in college, and what I would do is I'd play the original Final Fantasy, but with all white mages. So it was like a fun little spin on the game. Or I'd play A Link to the Past in French. Yeah. So I would do things like that. I would download an emulator, and it's like, okay, brushing up on my, trying to keep myself challenged here.
That's fun. Have you ever done those like randomizers? Ryan does Final Fantasy V streams every summer for charity.
I do Link to the Past randomizer. I don't stream it yet because I'm not confident, but I love watching the charity ones, the ones that Awesome Games Done Quick, when they do the Super Metroid Link to the Past.
I was going to ask if you've done that one. That one Ryan showed us on a stream once, and it broke my brain because I'm like, I don't think I can jump between those in my head in the same way.
Right. I have never I've never tried that one because I'm not good at Super Metroid as much as I love it.
Same.
I'm not good at it, but I love the atmosphere, and to me it's fun to just play, just to I feel like I'm playing a game. I'm actually doing something, not having to read too much.
And I struggle with even bomb jumping, like things that are very basic for people who are good at it.
Yeah, I can't do the wall jump. I had so much.
Yeah.
I beat the game last year because of the Switch and the rewind button. I was able to rewind all my mistakes and give it another shot.
Yeah, those are fun. I like that in the Mega Man Legacy collection too.
Sure. Yes. I'm not good at those also. I love the music and I love playing them.
I used to be excellent at the NES Mega Mans because that was like some of my first games. But when we went to stream them, it was like too much pressure to play well.
Right.
So I was really happy to have that option. Like, I think I did some good gaming overall, but it was like we don't want to lose too much time to silly mistakes because you're like playing in front of a crowd.
Right.
So tell me about the start of your YouTube channel and when you started like really logging all of your transcriptions and making them available to the public in the way that you have.
So I was doing my dissertation and I defended it September of 2019. So this was the end of my dissertation. All my analyses were done by stuff I'd find on VGM lead sheets and in NIN sheet music. And there were some dubious sources there. Most of them were excellent. They got the job done. I was able to see what was happening, but there were some that were more of an arrangement than they were the actual channel by channel analysis. And I was seeing things I didn't hear. And that was the problem. I was like, what's going on here? And my supervisor had said, do your own transcriptions. And I didn't know, I don't have perfect pitch. I have enough ears to have a degree in music, but that's not my thing. I didn't know we had all this software, which I can show later, when you can hear the channels separately. And that saved my life. And then I found a software when you can extract MIDI data from the SPC file. It's not perfect. I'll show you the issues with it in a bit. But that helped me understand like what's actually happening in these sources. So I put so much time into them. I thought, let me put them up on YouTube. Let me make a little scrolling. My first year or so, I had an older version of Sibelius that didn't export to high def because I didn't. So I actually had made, I think I just made like bitmaps. I think they were just screenshots, and I edited them in. I didn't even have Premiere yet. Some freeware for doing video editing. So they're a little clunky, and part of me wants to redo them, but I don't want to lose the hundreds of views. But so within the past year, I really got into it and realized this is a helpful resource. People are commenting, saying thank you for this. Also, I make mistakes. We all make mistakes. I'd rather be the one to make the mistake than use someone else's mistake and run with that. So there's a couple ones every now and then I might have heard something incorrectly, or the MIDI. I don't want to blame other people, but sometimes the MIDI that is extracted is wrong.
Right. And Kevin Burke talks about this too, that, if you're only using Zofar NSFs, you're beholden to the version that's uploaded there, or SPCs or whatever you're using. But there are other sources. And so sometimes you just need a different rip and things come across differently. And I know that I, as much as possible, try to play stuff on original hardware because, got the collection here. But in real time, I can't split channels. So there is a limit to what I can glean even from that to compare with the real stuff. Like, I don't do a lot of like hardware hacking. It's like, it's too delicate. I don't want to I don't want to mess anything up. I'd rather have it playable, but it has been an excellent resource. So, it's something to consider because you mentioned like I'd rather make the mistakes.
Yeah.
So, yes, it's good to seek these resources out and certainly like talk to those of us that really like doing transcriptions. If you're doing one, if you want help with it, sometimes I've even done them for people. But at the same time, I think that there's something really instructive about doing it yourself, even if one exists elsewhere.
Right. Because you learn the process. And as I'm doing them, choosing the notes, choosing which spelling of the note to use matters, right? Because that determines, well, what key are we thinking in? I'm mostly I play saxophone, but I also am a guitar player. So guitar players like sharps. Flats don't exist on guitar. So I tend to write everything in sharp keys, and I realize, well, what is the best way to spell this chord? And I was working on one in a little bit, which I'll show you, which also turns it around backwards in the fact that this is not necessarily classical music, and the things don't necessarily have to be spelled properly. And there's some stuff that is spelled that uses all these strange kinds of theory that I'm discovering. Well, it's strange, but the Neo-Riemannian theory that I know you've talked about before, like I've discovered, like that helps me analyze this music as I'm writing it, as I'm transcribing it, and I'm understanding like what the composers were thinking. It also helps me. One of my fascinations is timbre and how they're able to achieve certain sounds.
Yeah, because then you can look at exactly the numerical. Here's how they achieve this.
Right. Like going back to the NES, like the different waveforms, the different shapes. And you can see in FamiTracker, I'm not fluent in FamiTracker. I learn as I go, but I can see when the waveform is changing to get the timbre. Or I love the Mega Man tom-tom sound is a triangle, right? It's a triangle that is descending quickly, and it's supposed to simulate the sound of like a tom or a snare even sometimes. And then on the Super Nintendo a lot, there'll be a doubled sound. So I hear this cool sounding synth, like, what is this? But it's actually two things playing simultaneously, and their waveforms are coinciding a certain way. The delay effects are really neat. It's just being like 6 frames off. Like in the NES ones, channel 1 and channel 2, a lot of the Wily, that, there's a part when that melody is off by, I think it's 6 frames, and it's, or maybe 12 frames, and it sounds like a delay because of that.
A lot of triplet figures are done with that way too, where you're like, oh, it's just not quite an even number of frames for whatever the the underlying beat pattern is.
Right.
So you get some really fun effects there. But then it means that, okay, I'm going to set this in notation. At that point you get to make a decision like, okay, am I going to try to reflect that this is a 6 frame difference, or do I do it like I hear it and say, well, it's a triplet, or it's a gliss. I don't need to do every single little note in a run. I have done that. I have a section in my disc where I talk about, there is the purpose of a transcription is going to shape its form. So if I'm doing this because I'm trying to translate, something about how it's encoded, then yeah, I'm gonna spend a lot of time and get into that nonsense. And one measure is gonna take up a whole page,
Interesting. So I never was that specific. That's interesting. Like sometimes I would just write, this is off by 6 frames to create a delay effect.
I often do like little text notes. Let me pull it up. Actually, it's the only landscape page in my whole dissertation because it's really fun. Let's see.
Yeah, I'd like to see
dissertation.
Yeah, there were times when I can speak to that a little bit, like how you communicate what you're hearing, right? And some things that are done in the SPC file that sound very strange, look very strange to us. Let's see.
Jump to it. Add this on the stream. I think I have PDF.
Yeah.
Where I can just activate it. Let's see.
Yeah, I guess
this is just like fun little diversion here, but it's.
Oh, I didn't see. Accidental spelling is really problematic. Yes.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah,
it also means.
Danny Elfman, yeah.
I'll tell you. A lot of people ask me like, "What's the best orchestra in the world?" And I'll say, well, generally, I think like opera, like the Met, like that. Some of the hardest rep is there, and some of the hardest excerpts if you're taking auditions. But other than that, I would not want to be one of the gigging musicians that does like film scores. You have to be an absolutely perfect sight reader.
Right.
Because stuff is just produced quickly and won't necessarily be spelled the way you expect it to be. And it's just a different type of fluency.
Yeah. Film game also when you are backup orchestra for a rock group. I've talked to people that worked with Steve Vai and a lot of his arrangements and how they have to do it. Yeah, amazing, right? But they would do it so quickly, and it's just, like you said, has to be specifically done in the day sometimes of it. Other ones too, I read about back in the day when Metallica played with the San Francisco Symphony. This was like, I was in high school. It's a long time ago. And they were saying the scores were just kind of rough because.
We're going to just like, I'll tap this down a little bit, make it nice. And then I'll jump to the actual page where the stuff is happening. Okay, let's see.
I'm just looking at it.
Look at that little NSF there.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so where this came up was Dr. Mario. So you can see my cute little transcriptions and everything. And there's moments in there that are little shivers and little, glisses and things like that. All these little musical symptoms. And so I talk about... I actually referenced Thurston Johnson, who does a lot of work on Braille music notation, emphasizing tenuous mappings between the score and the sounding phenomena, and just thinking about like the limits of what we're able to capture in transcription. And so then I do measure 12 of chill.
Yeah, sure.
And
wow, what's that?
Measure 10.
Yeah, it's like, is that the
so I
point?
have to We'll do that.
I have some Metroid tracks that look like that I think I want to share.
Yeah.
Because it's like the point of transcription, like this one comment, like when you're transcribing something, we're using standard notation here. We're using notation that was devised for a certain style of music.
And captures certain things better than others, right?
And that looks exactly like the end of Metroid. It looks almost exactly. Yeah, there you go.
Here, I'll switch over. This one. And haha, there we go. Now your stuff is on stream.
Great, here we go. So right here, here is from Zebetite, I guess, or Zebetite, I guess, from the end of Metroid. Look at this triangle. Look at this triangle. And someone reached out to me like, how did you do this? I was like, I have the NSF file open on my other monitor for the pitches, but then I count frames for each one. This here, behind pulse 2 for delay effect. Is that lazy? No, I think it just gets the point across, saying that this little chromatic passage is simply just being doubled. If I had taken this and moved it over, they're saying,
I got it. It was the screen share was also your voice. So
sorry.
I just had to.
I thought they meant voice doubling, like this voice is.
No, it was on my end.
So right here we're seeing this atonal passage, which is not. It's kind of silly to notate this because it's more of a textural thing. And if we know this ties into the paper I'm giving next week on the diegetic sounds in Metroid, that's supposed to just kind of set the world here. But I wanted to see how was it done? How was this done?
And at the same time, if you scroll up to that top one, notice like the decision here to go behind pulse 2 for a delay effect instead of like, am I going to notate it exactly? Because like it just opens a can of worms and you're like, okay, what do I need to do with this transcription?
Right.
There is a time and a place to show exactly how it's offset. Like one example was I was trying to talk about in Zelda 1, the low heart beeping, right? And how it displaces one of the sound channels to do that. And so then I talk about it's not being read as part of the musical texture because it's not really a note that is like super important in the key of wherever it's like so pitch wise and phase shift wise it's a little out of sync, and because you're meant to read it as a signal. So there, I did try to show exactly.
Really? Okay.
That's another moment in the disc where like it looks like trash on the page, but like that's the point, right? That's when you do that. But most of the time, I'm trying to make this intelligible to maybe a music audience, and so you can capture it with all of these other things, and then you can always say in prose it's this many frames behind. Like we have more tools than just the notation.
Yes, right. And because the notation is not. That isn't a musical sound. That is a warning sign, like you said. That is telling us something is happening, and I think the fact that it is off time makes it work better. If that were programmed in the same frames as the melody, we might not even notice that that's the incessant beeping that I know so well from being a kid and hearing that. What is that beeping sound? But you're losing part of the music that way.
Right. And the other way to think of it is to maybe like go, okay, what's the BPM of the beep, and then what's the BPM of the underlying track? Like you could write it out that way too. And just, it's not that it's like 30-second notes tied like in weird ways over the, 64th notes tied in weird ways over measures and stuff, because it is just, this is at a slower tempo kind of a way of putting it.
Right.
Stuff like that. But so there's different ways to kind of approach this. So let's go back to the very beginning here. Kind of walk me through, you mentioned, a few different tracks here. So we're going to do some show and tell. So, we have a track, we want to transcribe it. Do you have like an SPC example, NES, both?
So I can show you several different. So one thing I've been working on Chrono Trigger, which admittedly I never played the whole thing. I noticed. I'm like, this is such a great game. I don't think I've ever beaten it. Great soundtrack, right? So I'll show you a couple.
Love me some Mitsuda bass.
Yeah, it's so good. So right here I have the track for Secret of the Forest. Okay, so I like to play them through this SPC player called SNES SP700 player, just named after the sound card. You can silence or play solo each channel, just like a digital audio workstation. You can adjust the tempo. So you can go down the quarter speed, and you can go up I don't know why you'd want to go faster, but you can slow it down, and it rewinds. Now this is important to mention because like audio overload on a PC doesn't
Does
rely.
not. And then you have to either play the whole track or maybe export a WAV file and
That's what I
open
do.
that in something. And
I
like,
recorded what I do when I was doing Final Fantasy. This is kind of jumping ahead, but Final Fantasy VII, for instance, I started doing that. I recorded in Cubase one track at a time.
yeah.
So I let the whole piece of music play for all 24 channels. Let it play, and then I figure out the tempo, and then I have that on my other screen.
And because you have the recording, then you could like slow that down or like do what, you can do additional editing. Like I often do stuff in Audacity, but like I'll pull up my extracted, whatever it is.
It does allow, yeah, like you said, that you can do save clip. I mean, I do have a Mac also, and it works better on the Mac. But then what I do is I extract it there and plug it in. Like I use an 1/8 inch cable for my Mac and record it in.
Yeah.
But it gets a little convoluted. So that's my issue with audio overload. I know it's got a Mac bias to it for some reason. So
yeah, weirdly.
Right? So this SPC file can be extracted into MIDI data. And I have this other software here, which I forgot to open prior to our beginning, but it's called VGM Trans. You simply drag the SPC file into this software, and you can save it as a MIDI. You can also, let me grab real quick the file I'm using. It's under, it's all organized. Yeah, so if I bring this in here, you can get information from the samples that were used as well. Now, in my actual transcriptions, I write suggested timbres because, again, it's kind of dubious where the names come from. I download sound fonts, and when I can look at them with a certain software in my digital audio workstations, I use a combination of Cakewalk and Cubase, depending on what day I feel like opening which program, and I get different information from both. I don't know where the names of those channels come from. The great example is Final Fantasy VI under martial law. That there's a melody that sounds like, I always thought it was an English horn. It's actually a French. I'm using air quotes. I know it's not French. It's actually a horn sample transposed. So I don't know where the names come from. So I give.
They do that a lot with strings too, where it's just one string sample and we just play it in different registers. Although I will say 6 is actually better about having multiple string samples because he was so interested in having that sort of orchestral sound, especially for like the opera.
Yes.
But most of the time you're like, oh, this is clearly, taken from a violin or taken from a cello, and it's just extended to the whole keyboard.
Right. The on that example in Final Fantasy VI, there's actually a string sound he uses that has like this section sound to it by, I think it's slightly out of tune, or it's a chorus effect that's doubling by the octave, and he uses that in the opera. I do the cop out and I just write strings. Some of them I did specifically write. So for like this, not Secret of Mana, Chrono Trigger, get those confused. I know they were developed together. There is a string timbre. I just write strings.
Yeah.
So that's why when I do these, I don't actually, mark all that.
So this is when you've opened a file, what we're looking at, this color coding here?
Yes, this here is all the information in the software VGM Trans. Now, this is a way we can learn about what's actually happening on every channel. So you learn about the pitch slides and all of how all the nitty gritty in making it. This is what the computer is reading. The computer doesn't understand standard notation, just like the Super Nintendo, just like the NES doesn't understand that. Those composers would have to write for,
assembly language. Yep.
Yeah, assembly language, right. They had to code it all. So this is all the coding that you had to deal with. I don't want to look at that. And this is one reason why I do transcriptions is I have a classical background. I don't want to I don't want to look at this either. This is cool looking. I know. I love, but
I don't know about you, but there's something about it scrolling top to bottom that like I'll turn my head.
Oh, me too. Honestly, I get motion sickness from this sometimes. I'm terrible at Guitar Hero because it goes that way. I need to look at like standard notation.
Trombone Champ, it fixes that, right? Because it's coming at you from the side, and and then you're like going up and down. I enjoy that.
That's a good point. So maybe
Probably
I'll
gonna play that tonight.
If they make a new Guitar Hero for the Switch, they should do that and put it on the side so it looks, like standard notation.
Yeah.
So I like having the neat notation in front of me. So if I already had done this, I extracted the MIDI, and this is what the MIDI looks like. I'll switch to my original view. All right. So this is saved. I didn't write this here. This is actually saved in the MIDI file. And you can see all this MIDI messages here. These are patch changes.
Yeah.
And a lot of just metadata. If you notice, I don't know why it hides this, but this thing always drove me crazy. Look at the tempo.
Yeah.
75.3349. This is why it's so hard to line up my videos, because I'm not going to keep that there.
Yeah.
You could, like, I could go on Sibelius and actually make one actually say 75 and then hide this one. So it actually does play at the tempo, but I don't actually know where that's coming from. If that was just when I bring these into Get BPM, if you know a website like that finds all the transients, they're off sometimes, and I have a lot of trial and error trying to make sure like the tempos are correct.
I honestly, most of the time, I do very approximate, and I just tap tempo, like those types of sites. There's so many of them. I can't even think of one in particular. You just Google like tap tempo metronome.
A lot of DAWs have them built into, and I'll mess with that.
Right, right. And I know that like my clicking isn't going to be perfect, but I'm like, it's about this.
It's something like that, right? But if I'm making the video for my YouTube channel, I want it to be in sync. But still, this is the stuff I teach my my music technology classes, where we're talking about MIDI and how, like, as a composer myself, I do all my scores in Sibelius first because I'm a speedrunner at Sibelius. It's the fastest notation software. But then I show you what gets lost in translation when you convert to MIDI. So this is a MIDI file. And you will notice that this is just metadata saying that the track. And when I do a real one, I'd like to, I get rid of all that. But these are in the wrong octave, which we'll see in a second. I brought up this example because I was transcribing this earlier. This isn't even here. I don't know what those 16th notes are. There is nothing being played on that channel.
Could it be like setup data?
It could be. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Well, so now this is like triggering something for me. So have you ever hooked up with Matthew Valente, by the way? Speaking of...
I've talked to him. We sent messages back and forth. He's the one that told me about this software.
Okay, great. So... Yeah. One of the things that blew my mind, he came on when we were doing the FF6 Pixel remaster, and he was the one that I was telling him for years in the Terra, overworld theme. There's that thing that sounds kind of halfway between a banjo and an acoustic guitar in the strum pattern, and he was like, "Oh, it's a bouzouki." Like, I'm not sure I'm saying that right. The Greek lute, and he's like, "Yeah," because he found the sources of all of these samples. And one of the things he was telling me was, when you only open things in like Audio Overload or some of those types of programs and you think a channel is empty, sometimes it's actually doing things to modify the other channels.
Right.
Could this be one of those?
It could be a modulator. It could be like FM synthesis when it's like a LFO. So it's this modulator that by itself you cannot hear. That's the L, right? That's the low frequency, and then it affects something else. That's something I might want to play with and see if that works. There could just also be data. Like, I don't know how to interpret like this number right here. This could be a silence. Could actually be silencing it. There are also some issues I found. Super Mario World, I'll bring up. There is a spot when everything was written off by a perfect fourth because the sample was actually being shifted by a perfect fourth, I guess, to get a certain sound. This actually brings up an important term, is the term sample. This is things that people get wrong in some of my quizzes, and I want to make sure I clarify what sample means. A true sample library could be an actual recording of the sound. So in Super Metroid, in the beginning, the Galaxy, or go back to the NES, Blades of Steel, Ghostbusters, those horribly sounding, or Super Mario 3, there's steel drum samples in the background. So a sample is an actual recording. So if I'm working on a video game and I don't have the budget to hire a violinist, which I will do eventually, I will program the violin part with the sample library when I have a whole bunch of G's that are recorded, a whole bunch of A flats and A's at my disposal. Sampling in the Super Nintendo was actually a sound that was copied and then transposed and mapped to every key. So if I play a middle C, if that's the bouzouki sound, whatever, middle C, or let's say the French horn sound in Final Fantasy VI, if I move it up an octave, its timbre will be affected because that sound is being doubled. Yeah. Right. The frequency is being doubled. So synthesis is something different. Synthesis is when the sound is created from scratch. You can use Fourier's theorem and talk about all those sine waves being stacked on top of each other to simulate the sound. I can try to find this video. It's a great video I showed in my classes when they play a sine wave and they start stacking sine waves on top of each other at different frequencies, and all of a sudden we hear a trumpet. And the class, I love watching their faces like, where'd that come from? Because you're mimicking the sound of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's synthesis. And in the NES, our synthesis is extremely raw. We just had the pulse waves. We have 25%, 50%, and 75% pulse waves. We have the triangle wave, and we have the noise, right? In the Super Nintendo, we can bring in samples. There could be other sounds that are recorded in here, and that's the thing that I'm discovering from doing these transcriptions, and that's one reason why we bring this up. So if I play, I can show. Actually, on that note, here, like if I played Torian from Super Metroid.
Okay, my question is: are people hearing that? Do I need to? I might need to switch audio sources here. Did anybody hear that just now? I'm guessing not.
You should be, because I'm routing my microphone and my computer through the same output.
Okay, just checking. wanted to make sure. Because I could just switch to the NDI source share being unmuted, and
because I have it here. Just again,
great. Great.
This here is my mic.
Okay, let's listen again to the burbling.
So listen to this burbling. Yeah. Like, what is that? How do I transcribe? I've not done a transcription for this track yet, because
isolated like that, you could kind of turn that into a beat. It's got like a night when it repeats.
I tried. There's no MIDI. I can't get a MIDI from this. I tried to count this. I put it at 25%. Like all together, watched all the channels running. So what was that? So if I bring up.
That's so good.
Like, what is it? It's amazing when you're playing the game. I mean, when I'm playing this game at this part, my heart is beating so fast I can't hear the music because I'm terrible at these games. But again, Gibbons talks about this in that one article. The sounds.
Dr. Burbles.
Yes, he calls this the blurring of diegetic and non-diegetic. Because it's like
the sounds in the machine.
Sounds in the machine, right? Because that comes from Tanaka himself. He mentions this, and Karen Collins talks about him in Game Sound Con, Game Sound, and talking about like, this is like a creature. It sounds like we're like in this living creature.
Mm-hmm.
So that is something that, those are samples, and I don't know the source material. And if I were to make I almost semi-jokingly made a score that just says burbling sounds and then put it up on YouTube and say, good luck.
Mm-hmm.
For a sound like this, like I'll show you, if we look at channel 5, I can't draw on the screen. I'm not on Zoom, but so I'm not hearing channel 5 is this one again. I'm not hearing that those pitches. So like we had talked about earlier, it could be modulating something. I don't know if it's affecting. But even if I listen to the bounce the MP3, extracted from Zophor's domain, I'm not hearing if it's. I don't think it's affecting anything, and I don't know if that's just, garbage data.
Yeah, I was gonna say sometimes there's just like garbage data in there too.
Right, that's what it could be.
That's the other question: is it that is it doing something or is it not doing something?
Right, and that's why I don't know if if that's why the MIDI file thing isn't really cheating, because looking at this, there are issues. The worst I should actually bring up is Castlevania 4. The MIDI files were so off. They were all off by a 6 or 30-second note, and there was so much very confusing data in there, and it took me a long time to clean it up, to make it work.
There's a lot of bad MIDI, shall we say, arrangements.
Right. Yes, there are.
Jarrell Jones does excellent MIDI, though. The ones I've seen from Jarrell are always pristine.
Good.
Yeah. So that's one source I can recommend, but he only has what he has.
Yeah. Because I can turn these into MIDIs. I can extract them. And if I felt like making another YouTube channel when I do remixes, when I take, Chrono Trigger and use the Final Fantasy IV sound font, I could do that.
I love that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of fun. I've seen a lot of fun ones that'll be like Master of Puppets using the Mario 64. I saw something like that pop up the other day. I was like, okay, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but
this is like when I did my Mario Paint Composer chapter for Michael, and it was like, essentially that's what people were doing by doing all of these pop songs in Mario Paint Composer, but they would use the cats for the vocal on Call Me Maybe.
Sure, yeah. I played with that so much as a kid. I still have it saved on my game cartridge, all pieces I used to write. So some things to talk about, like the reason I like, this is one of those questions I keep fighting with myself about when I'm doing a transcription. If we look at the first 4 parts together and I play them, these arpeggios. All right, so that's obviously, well, it's obviously off. It's off by an octave on this B flat sus chord. But the point is,
we're doing an arpeggio, but we want to have the sustain instead of having to interrupt it on the same channel.
Exactly. That's why it's written. And I know it's like a cooking show. I actually, did actually complete this one. And I was, I put it up the octave, but I want to show you the process. So what's happening here is I have it it's on separate channels. However, if you were to do an arrangement for somebody, you wouldn't do that. No one's going to count 1, 2, for channel 4. You would play this on one instrument. The reason it's separate is because these are monophonic channels.
Yeah.
If they were written as 16th notes, you'd get what it sounds like.
It wouldn't have that echo in it that gives it that like, ooh, we're in the forest.
Right.
So yeah, I see here you have kind of the reduction, as it were. Like this is what it actually would sound like, right?
Yeah, this is the MIDI file. This is what came from the SPC. And if I play this, it will sound terrible because it's in the wrong octaves. Look at this horrible notation. This is just, as a composer, I'm getting, issues. I have lots of issues with this. The beaming, the bass is written an octave off because this here is a MIDI controller. If I zoom in, a C11 is a kind of MIDI controller. I don't have them all memorized, but this is saying play that down an octave or even 2 octaves.
It's like a 8VA, but MIDI.
So if I do my own transcription, or there's one here, I will just simply write sounds 8VB, because a bass does, and then it looks nice and neat, and you can see actually what's happening.
Don't you love when you're doing video game music and you get the notation software? This isn't possible on the instrument. Red.
Right. Exactly.
I actually have that turned off in MuseScore for when I'm doing that though, because then when I'm working with real things again, I have to remind myself oh right.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because because it's confusing. But when I'm doing these, I'm thinking I just got to remember this is not for anyone to play here. They're just suggestion instruments.
But yeah, what I often do, and I'm sure that you're about to say that you do the same thing, is when I go to then make a final transcription, I will put then a composite channel. With here's the actual arpeggio, and then I will have the 4 below it that have that separation as you have it.
Right. I think I did that for this is the first one I think this from ActRaiser. It's a little stinger. I take out the time signature because it's not in a time signature, and it's pretty. And I put just channels 1 through 7 because why would you want to? They were all played on a separate channel.
Yeah.
Who would want to look at that? So there's the simple little. That's the first one that came to my mind is that simple composite arrangement. So that's one thing I would think of it doesn't really. It's not really worth it to have them all separate. I would probably say, and that's one thing I do for drums. The drum set parts are all.
Because drum sets have to be over multiple channels.
Right. The last one I did was the boss battle. I love that boss battle theme from Chrono Trigger, and that was done. If I show you how simply I did this. I simply wrote hi-hats, channel 6, drums. But the crashes were actually on 2 channels just to have them ring. And that was one thing. So I simply just use standard notation for drums. Yeah. Just, the feet, what I do differently is I put the snare, because it's on the same channel, I keep the stems the same way. I think it just helps a little better. And then this was all 3 separate channels. And what I had done here, same topic, is this horn was doubled with the synth. So why would I make another channel just to have something that is timbral and
Yeah, and again, it's what do you want this to be at the end of it? And there are times where it's important to me to have it channel by channel, and then there are times when I want to kind of make these types of reductions.
Right. So. And sometimes it gets cluttered. I remember when I was doing this one, I thought, should I just write this in parallel fifths because they're all a bunch of power chords? But then that gets messy later on when they do separate.
Yeah, so it's there's a real art to sort of taking the raw data, but then also massaging it and using all of your musician instincts and figuring out, how do I want this to look on the page and how do I fix the beaming and
Right. So what I would do, the beaming is a big thing. Right here, I like to keep it as I don't want to have those errant rests. So I would actually put a break there, or in fact I would.
You could just do that, and sometimes if I really want to indicate it, I might put a staccato on it, to indicate like it's cut off.
Right. So I just keep it as simple as, and like this kind of stuff.
That's the type of thing, especially if I'm going to turn it into an arrangement for like people to play. That's like the first thing that's going to get changed.
And that's a big important note too, is like these transcriptions are more saying, okay, here is what the composer of the game did.
Yeah. Here's what's in here. And then we can use this as a jumping off point to do other things.
Exactly. Like when I did my arrangements for like what we did at NACFGM, those string quartet pieces, I changed so much because I was like, I want it to be something that is playable by people, and that's not what you saw in the original part.
Yeah.
But obviously bowings and all of that. And,
and we didn't. I don't think we even really conferred much. We did a couple little. Okay, we're doing this between the violins, but we only had one rehearsal, so we didn't have a ton of time to like bow it.
But you would do that later because this doesn't give you anything about bowing. That's the arrangement process,
right?
How that's
and it's also like depending on how are the instruments playing together, how independent are the lines, like you don't always need to be matching bowings, and like that's all string player expression-y stuff.
Right. So that's something that the transcription, does the transcription need that?
Yeah, I was going to say my favorite moment. So we're talking about at North American Conference on Video Game Music, we do a concert. This is just in the past couple of years we've added on this concert feature because Matthew Thompson comes from a performance background and really wants to include all of these incredible video game musicians in the field. And this past one, we had Madison Drace singing, and Gregg did transcriptions for string quartet arrangements of the aria from Final Fantasy VI, and then what was the other one?
The Portal.
Cara
Mia Audio.
Yes, Cara Mia Audio. And my favorite little Easter egg in the FF6 arrangement, because of course that's like Celeste singing, right? Was there's a moment where you had me quoting Locke's theme, and it's like this little Easter egg in there. I like had Ryan listen for it specifically.
There was Tara's theme in the viola, because in the original part it's very bare bones. So when you do the transcription, you learn like, wow, this is pretty dry. So if a human were to play this, no one's just going to go, they're just holding half notes, right? So I put Tara's theme for the arpeggios. In Madison's cadenza, there's actually Kefka's theme, in there.
I have to go look at that again.
Yeah, at the very end, it's Kefka's theme, but just stretto.
So good.
It's just and it's slightly, there's one or two accidentals to make it fit the key. And then there's also there's one or two other little things in there, and I think that was just an important thing to do, because like
I love those moments. Yeah, it's like when you do Dancing Mad, like a transcription for the first time, and you get to the moment where like his theme is in there. Actually, a few different points where it pops up, but like where it's in major in the little like quasi fugue, and then it comes back again in minor, is like in the pedal of the organ, and I was like
I learned so much about that when I was doing transcriptions that I didn't notice. Because again, when you play the game, at least when I play that game, I play that game several times. I hear the music, but I'm focused on winning the battle.
Right. And even when you're listening analytically, you just can't catch everything.
Until you hear one at a time. And that's why, I come from the composition background when I'd have score study classes. And I'd have a Mahler symphony in front of me, and I'd look at every part and be like, oh, that's how that works.
Yeah.
And I can't do that unless I make the transcription.
Yeah.
And that's just one of those other, important ideas that you get out of the transcription. And there's other, like, you can look here. Look at the strange kind of notation that we get from the MIDI file, because how is that communicated? So when I do an actual one, there's a bend, on the flute. And there's like this little, like I would actually, put a slur on there. There's little bends. That's something that the player can look at and understand. But in the MIDI file,
sorry, my phone buzzed, but like from a spot I wasn't expecting.
Oh no!
So it turns out it had fallen in my chair. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So if you see like what's happening if I play this little part, let me go back to the first. Here. Right there. You hear that little bend? Yeah.
It's the best.
So So in the MIDI, it gives a MIDI controller. That means the pitch bend. So that B flat up to the C, I'm just doing that with my MIDI controller. On, like, again, in the transcription, I would write the C and tell the flautist, actually, I might, if I do a revision, I might put this, but, put it in parentheses, that's where you're coming from to bend up to that C. So that's a one of those little things that you don't get from the MIDI, and one of those things that humans do, that you need to put in the notation. So your transcription, how much do you put into that, to communicate that?
Mm-hmm.
The other things too, with this one is, where did I put the thing? Is the percussion at the same section.
I love that sound. It's almost like a creature, like
right,
groaning or sighing.
And now, I don't know what I almost want to call it a cuica, like in Final Fantasy and Mystic.
But like a super low cuica, right?
Right. If there's a big cuica, I think there is. I think in Varèse's ionization, there's a call for an instrument. I think they call it the lion's roar. And I think it's the same thing, just under a different name. That's some of the research I'll have to do. But because the cuica is usually funny. It's like a monkey sound. That's the point. It's supposed to be a funny instrument. So you hear things like that. Other examples were in, like I said, the Final Fantasy IV example, but also in the Thamasa sound, Strago's theme, if you will, from Final Fantasy VI. There's some sounds like, what are these percussion sounds? What do we call them? And
right. So wait, the Varèse one's not the regular percussion lion's roar, right?
I don't know.
I don't know the Varèse, because like normally the lion's roar, as I've played with it in orchestras, it has a drum head, but then it has a cord,
right,
of like horsehair, and then you
pull it.
Then you pull it.
I think that's the same. If it's made correct, because that's the way a cuica works as well. You're pulling
so it's
the drum
like
head.
a low cuica.
Yeah, because you're hitting the drum, and the head is being expanded, so the pitches. I mean, do I have
maybe.
It's in the corner over there. I also would show you. I don't have a cuica.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So I think that's maybe what we're hearing. And the Chocobo theme, someone said, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Chocobo's all about that sound.
Yeah. So it's that comical sound. In this case, it doesn't sound funny. It sounds just, I'm going to use the word diegetic again, but it almost sounds like forestral, like you said, like a creature. It almost sounds like that is, a creature of the forest.
Yeah.
And the great thing about a lot of these things is this: if I get this loop, like I would go and delete all this. If I just wanted to loop it, I mean, that's again why I love Sibelius. You just hit R and then boom, there's your repetition, and it just keeps going. There's my part. So there's you'll notice there's a lot of repetition when you do these transcriptions. You're using a little cell and moving it around. Yeah. I don't know what else.
I love
it. It's great, right? So
sorry, my luthier is texting me. I'm not trying to ignore you.
Sure.
I have to pick up my violin here after this stream. I'm getting like the works done to it for just in time for summer gigging and weddings kicking off. So there were open seams that I could hear the whistling. But he also is doing a bow rehair. He's replaning my fingerboard. He's building me a new bridge. Like it's a lot.
An overhaul.
Yeah, we're doing kind of an overhaul here. He's not touching the sound post. That's staying put. As far as I know, I don't think he moved the sound post. But
I played viola da gamba in college, and I was adjusting my bridge one day, and it slipped. It bumped and it slipped, and my sound post collapsed.
Oh no, I hate that.
I didn't know how big of a deal that was going to be.
Like
and
panic.
My teacher had to drive it a couple of hours away to the one, because who fixes violas da gamba, and he finds some guy 2 hours away to bring it to the
Funny story. This is a new luthier for me, because the one that I had been using retired, but in his retirement he's only working on like Baroque and earlier instruments.
Oh wow.
Now.
Okay.
And I was like, can I just I sometimes play Baroque music on mine.
Yeah.
So I was kind of like, oh no, and then I'm having to ask people like, who do you go to? So this is like a new endeavor. We're gonna hope that all is well, and that it sounds good. But anyway, he was just texting me. So, yeah, I love getting into like all the nerd. This is like why I'm so excited to have you on and just like show and tell, like, because there's so much weirdness that happens. You're like, oh, okay, I'll use my like oral skills, transcription, I'll take it. And then you get into it and you're like, there's some weirdnesses that come up that are very unique to doing this type of transcription work.
Oh, I know. Because like what is going on here? Like this is something that did not like what is that? It looks like sextuplets with some dyads every now and then. If you actually listen to the recording, it's simply 30-second notes. But the MIDI data, I don't know what was happening. The resolution of the file wasn't able to handle a 30-second for some reason. I do want to try opening in other notations to see how notation softwares to see how they'd interpret it. I could open it in, I think I have Finale on here, and I have or I've opened it in a DAW, but things like that have to be, addressed.
Massaged.
Yeah. But it's good you mentioned oral skill, like on the games that I don't get MIDI files for. I didn't start using MIDI files until a few months ago. I would do it all by ear, and this doesn't save as many steps as you would think because so much of it has to be listened to anyway and massaged, like you were saying. But like if I were to do something like, this, like
I love this track. I'm so glad you picked it.
Yeah, I didn't do Mega Man 4 yet, and I realized I should do. I'm sorry, that might be really loud.
Love Mega Man 4.
Yeah,
Skullman is like one of the all-time bangers.
Because it's the Iron Maiden. So if I were to do it's got this little idea, and I think it changes near the end slightly, but again, Sibelius, that's why Sibelius is the best notation software I have to plug, because of the R button, simply repeating stuff. But like this here, oral skills is really useful because I can't get a lot of information from this sometimes. And if I jump to an example I want to show, like how do you notate, right here, this frame, here's a drum sound. Yeah. So what is, I always thought that was a drum sound somewhere, but it's actually, I don't know how, this is probably very small, not translating properly on your, actually I can probably do a zoom on my PC if this helps.
Yep.
But it's a quick descent.
Right.
Chromatic, is it totally, it's completely.
Basically a gliss.
It's not completely chromatic. See, the OCD part of me wants to write down every single pitch.
Right.
Because it's not technically chromatic. There's a couple missed notes here and there, but that doesn't matter. I would just put, sometimes I change the note head. And on the first iteration of said change, I write simulate drum sound. And then just so they know, because if you write down every single note there as, what would it be, like 512th notes, or how fast, however fast I can get the note to go on here, that's missing the point. I'm not going to actually, communicate that in my transcription.
Right.
I would actually put it, in the triangle, because it is a triangle sound, but we perceive it as a drum sound. The same topic could be the noise channel, like. So if I get motion sickness trying to follow it, but if you look here, it's actually just two different sounds from the noise channel, which is just various iterations of white noise.
Yeah. And it's a particular thing with my NSF transcriptions. I'm always like, well, I want to indicate that this one is like lower versus higher. And so I usually come up with like, what's your solution to that sort of thing? Do you do it as like bass drum and It
depends on how specific, like this is obviously not really a bass and a snare drum.
Right.
But that's what's implied. So I would mark it as bass drum, but what I would do, let me just check one more time. It's sound. So if you look at the number here in this column, it's 2 and 7. So I would just indicate this one as 2 and this one is 7. Uh-oh, did it just crash? I think it just crashed. What? No. All this stuff running at the same. Oh no! Oh no! Because I have all this. Is my sound still on? Yes.
Yeah, you're.
All right, it's opening up again.
We're seeing your screen freaking
out. We're good. Oh no.
Yeah.
So you don't want to have all this stuff running.
So just like coming up with an arbitrary kind of drum setting notation, but then and then to not just have it all be on an unpitched drum, which is what I used to do in some of my earlier transcription. It's like especially noise channel notation practices have been evolving ever since I started. Like I'm still very much in progress. Oh, now you're muted. Why are you muted now?
Am I mute? Hold on.
There you go. Okay.
Am I on it? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
It's notation software or DAWs in general don't like to communicate with Skype very well. A lot of times it overtakes. If I have Sibelius and Cakewalk open on the same time, doesn't work. Nothing. I can't do anything. So I don't know it. Whatever. We're good. So I would
Finale, Andrew. PC running Finale wouldn't crash like that. Are you sure about that, Andrew?
Yeah. It's funny because I never really.
Sibelius is pretty resource heavy because it's such a big, robust notation software. If you're cheap like me / not a composer.
MuseScore is fine.
MuseScore is, especially if 4 has some growing pains, like MuseScore 4. MuseScore 3 is still perfectly functional.
If I weren't a composer, yeah, MuseScore is fine because it's free. But again, this is great for when I'm teaching though, because if I'm okay, students, here's your C scale. Look how quick that is with the R key, and I'll be like, okay, guys, do permute it. That takes 2 seconds because it's such a powerful software. But hey, if you're not a composer, if
you're just real cheap.
Real cheap, right? Well, that's the way I am with. I'm not really a video editor, but only reason I use Premiere is because I get it for free from school. So I used the free software until recently. So yeah, it's.
That's weird. MuseScore 4 keeps getting out of tune.
The out of tuneness might have to do with your sample rate. This happened at the computer lab at Rutgers. They had the sample rate in the notation software and the sample rate on the audio interface not match.
I have heard people say this. I haven't had that specific issue. I've been having playback weirdness where it's clipping a little bit, and I found that I have to have the mixer open.
Right. If you go here, you might want to check because I run mine at 48,000, hertz. So if this sample rate does not match what your audio interface is set to, it will do that. And that was happening last semester. Everything was being played at 44.1 instead of 48,000. And there were some students with and
that mismatch causes it to flip out.
Right, and it's calling. I shouldn't have opened that when I'm on Skype because I think it's probably it was probably trying to match it to Skype. Sorry. Did it cut out again? Probably. Hold on.
Nope.
We're good. All right. So it was playing things off by almost a half step. And, students with.
Weird. I haven't had detuning issues. I've had so many other weird little, again, growing pains with MuseScore 4. In general, I'm very happy with what the changes that they've made. Yeah, I've been pretty happy with it. And I'm somebody that is about as fast with MuseScore as you are in duplicating things in Pulse 2, because I'm just so good at the keyboard shortcuts by now.
Right. Oh, that's what it's all about is keyboard shortcuts. I mean, that's what I love about this too is when I'm transcribing and I want to if I want to figure out what chord it is, if you play the chord,
I love that.
So isn't that really neat? So I can do a nasty jazz
Okay,
chord.
I don't know that I've ever done that in MuseScore.
Yeah, that's a really good feature for the stuff
fun.
that I did with the last Nakfugum talk that I did with Rich, when I had to do annotations with the chord. I would just play the chord and it tells you what it is. So that's
cool.
That's a really nice feature too.
Yeah, I paid for Sibelius briefly, and then I was just I need to cut subscriptions in my life. So then I went back.
Yeah, it's why do you need? Yeah, again, free. You can't beat free. And I use, which is funny because I love Cakewalk as a DAW, but the free, it's a free DAW, but it's only PC, and I'm bilingual with this. And the issue is the free version doesn't come with many bells and whistles. It's just a clean slate. And if I open up Cakewalk again, the driver thing messes stuff up. But so if I'm doing a transcription and I need a recording, I can't have so much audio software open. I've noticed Cubase works really well with that, so I'll record it into Cubase, and that's a nice thing. That's the issue when you're doing transcriptions. A lot of times, if I have Sibelius and Fama Tracker and all this stuff open, I get audio driver issues, and that could be. I don't know if anyone else that wants to do transcriptions if they run into the same issues, but so other things that can be said too, if I'm doing noise channel, like we were discussing, I would a lot of this stuff here is really frustrating because if you see these purple numbers, those are just volumes, but if you start from this frame, they don't trigger. So if I started later on when it's just the purple, wherever that was, you won't have anything right here. If I start right here, you wouldn't hear anything because they're just changing the volume of
something that was triggered earlier. Yeah.
Like this. There's just So that I would notate that I think is supposed to probably be a cymbal sound.
Yeah.
Maybe. So you can see it switches to C. And that is just another iteration, another form of noise. And if you play with Family Tracker enough, you know that the noise channel, the amount of noise we're using, simulates different drums. That's the point of it. So I would just make another symbol for that.
Yeah. And then there's, it depends. It's kind of a game by game thing too, because there are moments where, especially in like the square channels, I am never going to say that it's an instrument, like,
never. Oh, I see.
Even if like the idiom is implying rock, as it definitely does in Mega Man. Most of the time I'm just like, no, this is electronically generated, but noise kind of behaves differently from the rest of them in a way where you're like, okay, there's high and low here that is giving you a sense. So at the very least, you want to notate that there's a heard pitch difference,
right?
Even though it's white noise.
I would never give it. I just say what it is here. VO3. This is the pulse width of the pulse. I just mentioned what the pulse width is, and you'll hear the timbral difference. Like some of them, I have every single. Let me think if I can remember.
Do you have Mega Man 3?
I do. And I actually transcribed. I was going to show. I can't remember. I'm just picking a random number.
3 is my favorite.
3 is great. I just picked the Castlevania.
Yeah, good one.
I'll show you. So I just picked one kind of at random, but if you look in this Castlevania example, this one doesn't have the pulse changing all the time, but if you see, they have the pitch in 2 different octaves almost simultaneously, and that simulates the sound of another instrument. So if you hear,
it's so fast, yeah.
It's so fast. If I can really quickly find
that gives it such a cool sound.
Right. Like Bloody Tears is just a good example. Oh yeah, number 3. So if I show you, I can show you. I did Mega Man 3. I have all the transcriptions for them too. That's a great one. If I show you Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, Bloody Tears, if you see what's actually going on here, they're changing every single one. You can see they're in octaves, and they miss one. I talk about that in my paper. I think that's just an oversight. But if you see here on square 2, the timbre is actually changing really, really quickly between a different pulse.
Could you zoom in slightly?
Sorry. Let me do this. Woo.
Yeah, so you can see the V1, V0.
Right. So you hear this channel.
So we have this rapid change.
So if I was going to play it, then I'll zoom in. Yeah. You hear that? And so look at all the things that are changing in that. You get another timbre. On that same note, talking about samples, Castlevania 2 is one of the games when they would use an actual kick drum sample, but it's 1 bit, so that means one volume. So that's actually a kick drum and a snare drum sample being played. So that is a pre-recorded instrument. I think it might come from a synthesizer. That's what I don't know. There's no way to tell because it's 1 bit.
Right.
And that's that.
It's
really
so compressed. It could be. Yeah.
Right. Because 1 bit meaning 1 level is just 2 to the first power. So 2 levels of amplitude, 0 and 1. So it's like having a score that only has, having no volume control whatsoever. You're on or you're off. And that's what sound is there. And they mix it with this sound. So if you see this, if I zoom in, that is a quickly changing waveform that simulates a snare drum. So there's a lot of, and this wasn't that later. This was in 1987, 1988. So it's not like it's one of the later NES games when they really thought, I was looking at Shatterhand as per someone's suggestion, and that has a lot of intricate stuff happening. This here is pretty intricate for an earlier game. If you look at the original Final Fantasy, it's so bare bones, and which is funny because that was a later game too. So it depends what composers were actually, how much they were getting involved in the timbre here and experimenting. How do you work with just this limited number of sounds?
I love this stuff. This is like where I like to live.
Yeah. And if you see, I changed my mind as I was doing some of these transcriptions, but every note is quickly approached by the same page. I just would write it in English because there was no, if I put a grace note in every single one of those notes, that would look really cluttered. Here I decided to use a different note head to indicate the waveform changing. Because that's literally what's happening here. It's not an instrument. So I kind of show that's another instrument. And later on, if we just look at that part, it switches to, instead of 1 to 0, it goes from 0 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see all these different kinds of, articulation they're using, and these swells. And it's such a dynamic piece for such a short piece, because how much was thought into this, into the fact behind here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's pretty fascinating. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Can you open like a Mega Man 3? Something?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let me open up. Which one of your favorites?
All. Let me think.
Snake
Man. Do Snake Man, since
sure.
I think Karen's still tuning in. Karen has a shirt of the Snake Man level.
That's awesome.
And I was like, I kind of want to buy it, but then we're gonna end up like twinning at a conference. Maybe that's not the worst thing, but
no, I think that's fine.
Like, cause that F minor, man.
Yeah.
Best key.
It starts with what did I say? It was number 10. Yeah. So it starts with F minor. So that's just the one part. So that phrase right there, if you see on my notation, they're the same. I wrote slightly behind pulse 1 for a delay effect, but also molto vibrato. So if we look on the first channel and you hear that by itself, after the little intro, this right here. Pretty plain. But when you hear it with pulse 2 playing simultaneously, it has to start from the first frame.
It gives it the best vibrato.
It's almost Zelda 2. I know that's Karen's nemesis.
Yes, Karen's nemesis.
But when you play both of those together, I didn't beat Zelda 2 until almost 30 years after owning it because of the Switch.
Same.
Rewind.
I beat it like as an adult.
Right. Even though my son beat it when he was like 8. He's just, it's just your brain is fresher, and I don't know what it is. But that sound is being produced by 2 sounds simultaneously, but one is a slightly different timbre. To me, that is a very Klangfarbe, well, not really Klangfarbe melody, because it's not switching, but it's an orchestral technique. It's the idea of when I'm scoring for an orchestra and I want to double the flutes and the oboes.
Really classing up the joint here. You've referenced Varese and Klangfarben melody in the same stream.
That's my background. But there is
Neo-Riemannian analysis. We're just like checking the boxes.
There we go. But there is Klangfarben melody. I can almost make that connection to like the Bloody Tears example, how the timbre is changing and changing the melody with the timbre. So it's kind of taking kind of from that. I don't know if we want to get into any hexachordal combinatoriality or something. Any of that tone, because I was trying to look at silence in Metroid and seeing if that was a row. In Super Metroid there is a.
It's like the almost tone row, right? Yeah. Will and I have talked about that.
Oh, yeah,
we were like so excited. We're like, oh. There is it? No.
No.
It's close.
I tried to look for 12 tone. That's one paper topic I would love to do, but it looks like it won't exist. Is 12 tone because there's 12 tone in film. There's 12 in Tom and Jerry. Tom and Jerry cartoons use 12 tone rows, and I don't know exactly. I had a composer teacher tell me about these, but I don't hear that in game music. But if you look at what I had done in Snake Man on the drum parts here, these annotations right here simply just show you the waveform change, and it is implying bass, close hat, open hat, snare. Like it's a dance beat.
Yeah,
and that's why this is such a great piece of music. If you hear the noise channel by itself.
Good old boots and cats right there.
Right. And then later on, it changes to something a little bit more syncopated right here. But it's using, I could have written this with just 3 lines saying bass. Actually, it would have been 4. What sounds like a bass drum, what sounds like a snare drum, and then the 2 hi-hats. But it's not really that. I think it's easier to show, hey, it's a drum beat. So if you were a rock band, I would love to have a Mega Man rock band at an ACFIGM one year, and have a drummer. The drummer would be able to read this part. I think that would, and then the guitars can, one guy can use one player can use a certain kind of effect, on the guitar, and the other one will play with a different effect, and then you get boom, 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 the bass line in there.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So there's a lot, and Mega Man 3 also has a lot of this within the parts separate. I write loco, just meaning in place. That is just showing that that is no longer a delay.
Mm-hmm.
And then the vibrato. Sometimes I use the guitar symbol for vibrato. I know that confuses a lot of people. They think it's zoom in here. Just
yeah, but it's not like violinists. Like we're just told to vibrate everything, so we don't really have a symbol for it. So
right.
You may that makes sense to me. Like I can read that and go, okay.
If it's in here in Sibelius, like a lot of these lines, it's like guitar players read their own notation, just like guitar play. So that's vibrato. I've just had a lot of people ask me in my classical.
Having worked a little bit where I've done stuff involving guitars, like now I read that as vibrato. But I think string players are often like, wait, what?
Yeah, I guess you do it anyway, right?
Unlike but if there's no TR in front of it, then we're not going to read that as a trill, right?
You know how many times people have trilled when I put that, when I just mean, like I've done it on clarinet. Because clarinetists usually don't play with vibrato as much as other wind instruments. It just sounds too much like Benny Goodman, which isn't a bad thing, but classical. And I would write that and I'd get a trill. I said, Andrew wrote, which ones? Red violin. I saw the red violin perform the Allentown Symphony years ago.
Red violin, that's a fun.
Yes, Grigliano, right? How do you say it?
That's such a fun, like everything about the way that they decided to do that film, like all the different. Like, oh, this is like little Mozart. This is like little Vivaldi, you know?
That's right. There's 12 tone. But yeah, so this is strictly, again, you learn things about music theory when you're, like, what I think is great about doing these transcriptions too, you'll notice a lot of NES. And this is something that I know has been discussed a lot. I've seen in the Discord and amongst other scholars of NES, is there's so much repetitive patterns. And Karen Collins talks about this a little bit in Game Sound, but about using the same cell and repeating it, and if that saved space on the cartridge somehow. But if you notice, the bass line here is just this bump ba-doom ba-doom bump ba-doom ba-doom, same thing, just moving. Like this here, like this is the same rhythm as this, but this here is just a sequence. And if you look at the B section, it's the same thing twice, and then move down and then move up. There's a lot of sequencing happening, a couple little changes right here. And I don't know if that was done because it's rock and that's a rock style, or if this was really a conscious decision to save space. And again, it's briefly mentioned in that text.
There's some of the work on, like, okay, there's the micro looping, the meso looping, and the macro looping, and like things can be kind of deployed differently. Karen actually has some work coming out on Xanadu pretty soon, where it was surprisingly difficult to probe into that deeply. In terms of applying a repetition on a single channel basis, and like how exactly is that programmed. And even folks in like the NES dev Discord, I'm not explaining this properly because it's not my article, but like there were issues answering basic questions about, like, you know, is there a trigger just saying repeat this, repeat this, repeat this?
Right. I don't know, and I didn't do facts
because when you open up the NSF, it just appears over and over, right?
Right. It just I don't know if there's any kind of thing that tells you, and that's the thing I don't really know.
I love that you went and opened up Xanadu.
Again, that was school bus conversation, 2nd grade. There was a boy that sat across from me in 4th grade. He goes, he said, I rented a game called Faxanadu. That's what we said.
Faxanadu is what we kept saying on stream.
I said
purposely.
And he says, and I got the magic shield in the first board. So I said, oh, that game's cool. I got it from Santa, I think. And it was, I loved it because it was, it was weird because it was all brown and orange. Like everything's like orange and brown in that game. But it was, that was a fun one. I enjoyed it. But yeah, that one, I don't know much. I can transcribe this one if that would be helpful. But
I did quick and dirty ones that I know I sent over Karen's way when she started turning that into an article. But stay tuned. There's an article.
Yeah. That's excellent. Yeah,
there's an article.
Game from I know well
getting
that
out the door on that.
Talk about that one enough. That one's is the town theme. I remember addressing it. I left it out of my dissertation because it doesn't sound like a town theme. It's like a very I don't know what number it is. That's my one issue with this. By the way, this software here is called NSF Import. I know it looks like Fama Tracker. It's actually
it's kind of like an add-on to.
Right, it's like an add-on that lets me import any NSF files, hence
Yes.
the name.
Which is, if you're not going to, if you're only going to compose in it, then you just have Family Tracker. But if you are wanting to do what we do here and do the analysis of the NSF, which is just Nintendo sound file, it's like a fan created format. Then you get the importer and you pull it up. Like, and you have to know what track it is.
Yeah, because that's the you have to know what.
I love this track so much.
It's so cool, but. Sequencing, right? So, and this is
it went off today. Yeah, congrats. I knew you were like imminently getting done with that.
Really echoing. Oh, the echoing might be because I might be going through Dana's mic, and also this is playing probably very loudly.
That one is not on my end. I can tell you at least.
Or maybe it's going through my microphone.
It might be. Yeah.
I'm not wearing headphones. I don't.
It's going to be published, Minecraft. So stay tuned. Like it went off to be published.
Which journal?
Is it MTO? I don't remember. I think it's MTO.
Nice.
I don't have a lot of brain.
That's a good.
With the
Music
Theory Online, which means it'll be open source, open access,
I love those.
which is the best thing about MTO, and I wish every journal could do it.
Too.
So we'll publicize that when it comes out.
I never understood. Yeah, because I remember when I got my JSMG article, they said I can share it with anybody.
Right.
But it's not, which is still almost open source. I gave it to all my students, and I don't know if any of them read it, because it's not. I don't really teach game music. I teach tech more, and but yeah, that's I put on my website and everything too. But I don't want to take business away from them at the same time, you know.
Right. Well, it's a delicate dance because the bread and butter for a lot of these journals is the institutional, like purchasing just access to specific journals or to suites of journals.
Right.
And that's generally a bigger deal than like the one-off thing. Color and like Karen's been spending a lot of time like doing these really beautiful like color-coded charts, kind of explaining things about how the music works.
I love that.
And so she did end up at least starting from some of my transcriptions, which I had just done because we streamed it. Like it was like a quick and dirty, like I do for our streams where I'm like, this is just like what I could do quick.
Right.
Like when we did Maniac Mansion with Andrew recently, I was like, I decided literally the week before, I want to transcribe some of this. This is fun, but like, it ain't gonna be.
Yeah.
It's gonna be what it is.
Go look at some of those,
especially because Maniac Mansion has some rhythms.
Yes,
because
it does.
that team being so diverse too, it was like they were all composing in whatever MIDI they wanted. And then it was being David Warhol was then kind of like massaging it into the assembly language. So like there's things that are kind of like, this isn't how most people do NES music.
Oh no.
In it. So then I'm like, we're just gonna get it like kind of dead. There were moments where I even put in there like there's some bits happening here and I don't really feel like do it. Or I even did that in Final Fantasy VI, like where there was the harp arpeggio in the aria. I think I literally put, I ran out of time to transcribe this properly, so here's basically the notes.
Yeah. Because that's sometimes what you got to do.
Again, if it's for a stream and we're just like using it as like this is kind of fun to see what it looks like moment, it's not going to be the same as when like I go to then publish it, then I'm like, okay, now it has to be good. Now it has to be like a different level of good. Yeah,
yes,
definitely.
I would love it if you could send it to me. You were excellent because I know that game well. I love the color coded. It's funny because the paper I'm doing going to be showing at MAMI, I actually decided instead of writing a bunch of words, I set emojis for each instrument. And I'm like, you know what? I did it as a kind of a joke to myself to consolidate my thoughts. And I thought, why not?
Again, very Mario Paint of you, using the icon for the instrument.
Exactly. And that's what I did. So I said, like, the brass, I put a picture of a trumpet, the drum, and I'm like, wait a minute. Instead of writing all these words here, if I show this, I think it might be an easier way to get the information. And for MTO,
that's so cute. I love that.
Yeah, I think that might work nicely. I think it's okay to evolve.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much.
But hopefully that makes it into my presentation for next week. And
I can't wait. I'm not going. Is it? Are they streaming? Are they hybriding?
I don't think so. I haven't heard anything. Maybe someone
That's too
correct
bad.
me about that. But yeah, because it's a huge conference, and I'm a little bit upset by that because there's 4 concurrent sessions.
Yeah,
And,
that
yeah,
conference is always a big to
I know.
do.
And I'm up against someone with whom I went to grad school, so that's a little upsetting. I would
Oh
like to see
no.
his paper. Yeah, he's in another room. But several people from NECVOCM are there. No hybrid, yeah, thanks. But several people that in our crew are there. So hopefully I'll catch all their papers.
Well, then my second question is maybe there's a way I can still see it because I'm very interested in this topic. Or
Yes.
if not, I know of a certain conference coming up in October in LA called Game Sound Con.
Right. Yes.
Maybe
And
slip me your abstract.
I did, and that's funny because
Oh, you did? Matthew and I haven't met yet because we had to get grading in.
I sent the same one. Did I send the same one? I think I did. Even though it will be, I think it was slightly revised because
Sure.
as I wrote that one. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. I'm glad you submitted.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hound people. The deadline technically passed, but like Matthew and I, for our track, the deadline doesn't exist until we decide
That's good
it exists.
So maybe I'll send you a revised. Well, I mean, it got into Mammy. I think must be pretty good. Thanks to your Wombat stream that helped me make better abstracts. No, because I started getting in after I watched that stream. I was like, okay, but I was planning to actually putting it on YouTube.
Cool.
Yeah, because I already have a YouTube channel with another YouTube channel with subscribers. So I'm like, maybe I'll put it up because I was going to pre-record it so I don't.
Yeah.
So I get my 20 minutes. I'm afraid I might get too verbose or talk too fast that it's too quick, and I want to make sure I get it on the times that allotted.
So if anybody out there was like, oh man, I missed the Game Sound Con deadline, shoot me a message because Matthew and I have not met yet.
That's good to know the inside information because I wanted to go regardless because now we're getting our contracts were just ratified at my school.
Congrats.
We had no funding last year, so I paid out of pocket for all conferences. Now I can afford to get out there.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, we're gonna have a grand old time. It's such a great conference, and you get to like really nerd out. Going to, if anybody has done like GDC, GDC is interesting but very overwhelming because of its size and because it's not only it has a game audio track, but it's not only game audio. Okay. So like everybody goes that is in the industry. The only year I went was because I was presenting with Ryan, Will, and Steve. So we got like our entrance waived for that as presenters. Still had to get out there and pay for a hotel, but that's the one time I've been. This is like you take just that track and you make it its own, the whole conference. And what I like about it is there's things that happen in like a GDC space when like the audio people know that there's mostly audio people coming to their talks, but it could be anybody. And so there's more of like, you have to sort of explain things in a way, it's like different audiences. If I'm talking at American Musicological Society, there's going to be things about gaming that I have to explain that I don't when I present at NACFAGUM, right?
Right.
Because like I don't need to tell people what an RPG is or anything, but like you can't always assume shared knowledge. When you go to Game Sound Con, and you go to the VR track, there's going to be moments where like I'm not going to be able to keep up because they will get very technical, and that's the best part because you can hear these composers like really digging, and some of them do it more so than others, but some of them really dig into like the nuts and bolts of what they're doing and the workarounds and like.
When were you there? Because I was there 2018.
19 was when I got brought on board.
Okay, sure. Sound kind of cool because I was there. I think it was the first year they did the Ludomusicology track.
Yes. So Matthew founded it and then immediately was like, "Oh, I want somebody else on this with me," and he reached out to me just because we like each other, get along well.
Right.
And we get along really well with Brian, so we've been putting together like really fun groupings. We're trying to. Obviously, it's one of the few things that happens on that side of the country every year. So it's kind of nice for folks that are not on the East Coast to have an opportunity to not only present, but to like come and see stuff, but then also get that interface with the industry because that piece is just so cool.
That's why I like that one because I crossed the bridge from, the industry stuff, because I do I'm writing for games right now, and that's what my academic stuff is kind of secondary, so I can have a job.
Yeah.
Because game music doesn't necessarily, well, hopefully that will become my main job one day. But so that's why I love Game Sound Con, because you're meeting with people from both sides that do it and the people that write about it. So
October, I don't remember the exact date. Let me look up.
Mid-October, I can't remember. I think it's the 17th. It's like in the middle of the week, right? I think it's
usually a Monday, Tuesday. It's kind of weird. Yeah, October 17th and 18th.
All right, you got it, yeah.
Burbank Convention Center. So it's technically Burbank. It used to be at the one in Biltmore Hotel.
Yeah, it was beautiful. So nice. I don't know if Burbank's going to be better. I want to try to get.
Brian is really excited about it, so there must just be something about the spaces fitting really well with what he needed. Right. But yeah, we love it. And here, I'll put a link to everything. There it is.
I want to try to get my I founded a video game music club at Rutgers, and I want to try to get student funding to get them out there. I think that'd be a lot of fun for the students. And
there is some kind of a student scholarship that one of Ryan's students won last year.
It's heard, yeah.
So you might ask him about it, because I should know, but I'm not positive. But he would have been involved with helping that student apply and getting them out there. So, yeah, ask Ryan Thompson about that. But yeah, Matthew and I, we've always kind of been doing our own and that's part of Brian, like, trusts us. He's like, if you don't see what you like in whatever is proposed to you, like, strong arm your friends into presenting. Wow. Or sometimes we poach stuff from that has actually been sent into a different track.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Yeah, but there's conversations all the time where we'll be like, hey, what are you thinking about this one? Because we really want it. And so we've done a few like that where we've pulled in industry people, but that just their focus seems to fit what we do really well. And so, and usually they don't mind. But there's a game audio research and then like a game audio studies Ludomusicology track, and people often like get those confused. The research track is a little more empirical, is how I would put it. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if
whereas we do more like musicology theory.
Right. I wonder if something empirical could be more like doing what we were talking about today, like finding the origins of these samples.
No, that would actually fall more under our. Well, I wouldn't say that it wouldn't, but I've seen things that are a little bit more like sociological in nature, like that type of.
Yes, there was a guy that when I was there who had done a study based on heart rate in horror games.
Yeah, so like when I say empirical, like that type of stuff. Yeah, sure. Exactly. Yeah. But there's overlap. So like we're in contact with Norm, who runs that channel, and we'll sometimes be like, this seems like this fits you versus like this one from yours fits ours. So we do a lot of behind the scenes like organizing. To make it just a really interesting section. So yeah, please. So you already did submit.
I submitted it like the day before the deadline. I was like,
brilliant.
I submitted to a lot of conferences already, but why
shows
not?
You that Matthew and I haven't. I saw a few of them as they came in, like just where I got the notification. But yeah, I haven't looked in depth at all of them yet.
I think it's pretty much. I think it's the same abstract I used.
Cool.
If you
have an update, send it along. I'll copy and paste it into the document.
Because I wrote to Matthew. I think I wrote to Matthew specifically, and I said, will you accept something that is going to be presented at another coast? I'm like, I don't know the ethics.
He generally doesn't want to see something if we just saw it at like NACVGM, right. Because the overlap in the audience is so much. But if it's been at a conference where like most of the people have probably not seen it, but we do get where somebody presents it, and then they immediately want to do it at Game Sound Con. We're like, well, we just saw this, so like, I might do selfishly, we don't want it to be at both of those conferences.
Maybe I'll write to you with like the caveat saying like I would probably do a revision based on comments, kind of like
I would hope for that anyway. I know some people just give the same talk a few times, but it's like I can't imagine giving it once or twice and not wanting to change some things from how it went. Yeah, that's just I can't imagine not doing any change.
As I've been doing this paper, I realized I could do a whole book on Super Metroid because it was supposed to be space in general, and Super Metroid is one that we talked about briefly before. Like there hasn't been enough talk about Metroid, and it's one of the biggest franchises.
Do like the Tim Summers Ocarina of Time book, but do it for Metroid. You talk to Tim.
Yeah.
Get Intellect to do it.
That'd be because I wanted to talk. I mean, my pet game was always Final Fantasy IV, but I love it. But Final Fantasy, again, it's just enough.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this a lot. You've talked about in your stream a lot. Like sometimes close the book on it. And the other big series, I mean, there's Final Fantasy, Zelda, Mario. What about Metroid? The music is so stellar. Yeah. It sticks out completely amongst the other games I looked at. So maybe I'll look into that.
Yeah, that's my recommendation.
I just got to transcribe that Torian track.
We are coming up shortly here on the so-called Summer of Summers. So there's going to be a few other things here in the mix, and then we're going to dive into, actually not the Ocarina of Time book because that didn't win the poll. We're going to do Understanding Game Music, but we're going to be doing our Summer of Summers. But I recommend, I mean, his it's expensive because it's hardback, but the Ocarina of Time book is, I think, a model for how to look at a single game's music in its entirety.
Nice.
When I get like undergrad students that are like, oh, I want to do my final project on, insert game here, but the entire soundtrack, I'm like, no, you won't. And then I hold up the book. I'm like, this is what it looks like to do a final project on a single game, right? Like,
the only full book.
I want you to focus on a couple tracks for like the purposes, because otherwise it's going to get too generalized. You're going to make and all your generalizations are going to be terrible.
Right.
Because you're just like trying to fit it in a small 6 to 8 page paper. Are you kidding me? No, like
it's not going to happen.
Maybe 2 tracks. At most, you do a comparison of 2 tracks.
I had to cut so many things out of this 20-minute talk because for that reason. There's so much to be said. I was just, again, I was referencing the original Metroid. I cut out a whole bunch of that section to try to compare.
Yeah.
So I was compare Brinstar in the first game to the second game, and it's just. There's a lot that can be said about this music. And
if I'm doing conference talk, my rule of thumb is between 1 and 3 examples, and maybe depending on the in-depthness, right? I can do some little snippets of other things where I play them quickly, just as like, here's more of the same thing. But generally, we're talking like maybe 1 if I'm really unpacking it, but maybe 3. Like that's kind of been my go-to where. It's already so short on the prose. You write it and you find out that you have a lot more than you need most of the time. And so then I have to then think, okay, it's usually 20-minute talk. We're talking 10 pages if you don't play anything. You don't play anything. Right, and even then, that depending on how fast you speak, you don't want to speak too fast either. Some people just say, well, I will just talk quick.
Right. No.
Bad solution.
I went and I practiced slowing my speech down, not on the computer, but speaking. I spent hours this week practicing the speech to make sure it's very, very clear.
Because especially people need to absorb what you're saying, right? Like they need a second with some of it, and you have to pause instead of like, obviously you know more than you're putting in the paper, and you can always publish it and add that stuff in, and or have it come up in the Q&A. There's ways to kind of hint to people to ask about certain things too. Or sometimes I've even been direct. I'm just like, ask me about this during the Q&A. Like I've done that in conference talks. I'm not ashamed to do that. I'm like, I had to cut this for time, but like bring it up or ask me in the hallway, I
mentioned that in my script. I even say due to time or for brevity's sake, I'm cutting this part out.
Like, and that's totally normal. But I think that's, on top of the abstract thing, when you get to the actual paper, that's often and I don't want to like slam graduate students, but like I think that there's especially when it's your first few papers, you kind of want to cram it all in. You're like, I have so much stuff, I want it all in here. And it can feel a little bit like chopping off an arm to take some of these things out of a paper. It's a topic you care about, you're really excited about it. But there is like a time, save it for the publication. There are things you can save for later. And figure out like what's the most compelling, and what's going to be the one that's going to really help like the discourse get going, and like we can jump off of this in the Q&A and in conversations during the weekend, and just kind of trust. And no one will assume that the rest of it isn't there. So be willing to kill what you create. Thank you, Andrew. That's the way to put it. Who was it though? Somebody was telling me at one point or maybe I just saw it on Twitter, that it was, I think, an English class, and they give their students an assignment about halfway through the semester. They have them write a 10-page paper. And then a couple weeks later, they have to chop it down to a 5-page paper.
Oh, wow.
And then the final project is turn it into 100 words.
What? Okay.
So instead of going the other way around, doing the abstract and then writing and then fleshing it out, you start with the bigger thing, and then you learn the art of editing it down, and finding what's essential in what you've done. And I'm like, that's brilliant. I need to do that. I need to have that be like a centerpiece of something. One of my classes. I hear my 2-year-old returning.
Because I get a lot of fluff when I talk about classic having a page limit. I get a lot of useless words and realize learn to cut that back.
Yeah, and I usually tell them when they ask me, because I don't list an arbitrary. I give them a ballpark of 6 to 8 for a lot of the undergrad classes, and I'm like much beyond that, and it tends to have a lot of stuff that doesn't need to be there. Yeah. But I tell them, I'm like, it's not because I'm looking for it to be exactly X number of pages. Like, I care about the content. So I've had shorter papers succeed. I've had longer papers fail,
Yeah, right.
And I've had ones that are right on target that do better or worse. So it is about developing the good content, but editing's a big part of the process. Anyway, we're not talking about transcription anymore.
Right. All transcription.
That's what we do on these channels, though. We digress into academia in general. I'm trying to think, is there anything does anybody in the chat have? I don't think I've missed any questions along the way, just kind of a lot of conversations. Does anybody have any questions for Gregg about this whole transcription process? Some of the programs that are used, I think we've covered a lot of the kind of interesting snafus that we can.
Yeah. And we're talking a lot, and some people have asked me privately, why are most of mine older Nintendo games? It's not just because I'm biased towards them because I love those games.
You're like, but I am.
I love those games, but also it's easier to transcribe because I have individual tracks. When a game is made for the Switch or even the Wii, it's just like everything has been melted down to one file. There's not much I can do. I did do transcription. I did like 1 or 2 of Undertale for Undertale Live. I don't know how I didn't publish them because my friend was doing the arranging for Undertale Live, and he asked me.
And needed the raw,
Yeah. So my transcriptions for them was a little bit more than a lead sheet.
Yeah.
It was basically, I was able to, what I did for that, just if anyone wants pointers, I took the file and I have a better software now called Spectra Layers, made by Steinberg. When it extracts, it tries to make stems for you by finding frequencies. Yeah, it's made by the people that make Cubase. And you can have a bass line, the drum set, vocals all separate. Apparently, there's a phone app called Moises that works really well doing this. A student and a friend both recommended it to me. What I had done before that is I simply put an equalizer on the track and focused on the bass. When I did when I did the Portal arrangement that we played at Necfagum, I didn't have MIDI for that, so I had to do that all by ear, focusing on one track at a time, and I extracted, just putting an equalizer on certain frequencies so I can focus on one instrument. So that worked really, really well. Don't know how germane it is in terms of
that's a great question. So like using a commercially released soundtrack versus what was in the game itself.
Yes, because those are arrangements, obviously,
right?
And that's what sometimes you'd have to, if you wanted to, you're saying looking for older arrangements. If you're looking for something new, if you're listening to the Distant Worlds version of Final Fantasy XIV or something, that is actually very close to the original game. I was actually looking at that recently because when I went to Distant Worlds, I don't know a lot of the newer games. So I was listening to, I know 12, which 12 is new to me. If it's made after 2000, it's new. So I was listening to some of the stuff. Like, what am I going to hear? And that would be interesting because, again, it's just it comes down to what is transcription, what matters. If those of you that have played in school band in middle school, you're playing versions of the music, and just because you're missing a lot of the detail in the original version, if you're playing like a watered down version of Beethoven's Fifth or something, we've done this middle school orchestra.
Those like abridged versions where they cut out the development section.
Right. Is that still the piece? And it opens up a whole new can of worms about arrangement. And And I mean, I've had pieces like, what is a song?
Stefan
What is a
still
song?
here?
Yeah.
Echoes of Stefan's
Right.
Uematsu chapter discussing that there's a spectrum here, right? Like there's transcription, there is arrangement, and there's orchestration. And these are very related and often conflated even by people you are freelancing for that
Right.
actually want one or the other but tell you the other one and
Right. And then there's remix. Like what
right,
is
and
remix?
that's before we get into the the remixes, the remakes, the recreations.
Because I made pieces that I put on YouTube years ago that I didn't know I just used the term remix because kids like that.
Yeah.
And but I don't know, remix to me would mean you're using the original material and rearranging the stems. And that's not really what it means. So it's kind of like the term is pretty vague, and I think it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
It is
So
perfect.
I've developed, because I do a lot of freelance stuff.
Yeah.
It's usually not video games that I'm doing. I do my own video game transcriptions, but most of the time I'm transcribing some new Taylor Swift song, or
Right.
something that was in Bridgerton is what a lot of the brides want these days.
Okay.
Of course, a lot of those are Vitamin String Quartet,
Right.
and then you go and there's two cellos.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
There's
Right.
those moments where you're like, it's not actually a quartet, so it's not going to be exactly their version. But yeah, you start with a transcription, and then you sort of fit it to your ensemble, and that's more of an orchestration process, right? But then it doesn't. If I'm doing it just be like for a bride for a wedding, then I might do more arranging. I might be doing a little more play with like, let me change the accompaniment pattern then in this part, and like
that brings me back to transcription in the way that it is when you are arranging and orchestrating, you are recomposing for your new ensemble. And I presented a paper at CMS with Madison actually a couple months ago about our arrangement
College Music Society, right?
Yeah, sorry, College Music Society. This was at the Northeast.
Most folks know. Most of our viewers know this, but just in case we have students signing on, I like to define our acronyms.
Yes, that's right. Because I say NACFAGOM, and like, what are you saying? But the College Music Society, and we talked about the arrangement process and saying, as much as I love that aria from Final Fantasy VI, it's not really fun to play unless you do something with it. It's a lot of it's just.
It's very it's repeated and
it's very bland. It's very pedantic in a way. Just here's my chord progression.
Yeah, like the strophic quality of it too. It's like it kind of begs for a little bit of ornamentation, like a da capo aria would.
Right. And that's what we had done. We added that in the vocal part, and also I had you played the violin part. You knew I took liberties with it, and that's part of arrangement. But it's also because, again, you're recomposing for the instrument. If there's like I played, this is the most cliche example, but the Bach cello suite, but being done on every instrument. When I play it on guitar, it feels like it works on guitar because they put it in a different key, and actually they have it tuned differently and dropped.
It's like more idiomatic.
Right, and then they have the notes, like they have some chords that ring together. I'm like, oh, it feels like it was made for that instrument, rather than just reading the notes.
Yeah.
And if it were a monophonic instrument to a guitar, it doesn't work the same way. And I just think good arrangements, work with the materials. What I always tell my students to do for arranging is to kind of do a reverse. You have the score, do a lead sheet of the score in a way, do a reduction of the score, and then recompose from there. And that's a great way to do things rather than match each instrument to each one. It doesn't always work the same way.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction to make for people, because a lot of people will just use arrangement to kind of mean all of those things.
Right. I think they mean different things.
But they might be looking for something that is more of a transcription, it's faithful to And most of the time, I get brides that just want the song. But sometimes they're very particular about like, this is the version I want, and as I start walking, I want it to be this moment of it, like this chorus or.
Oh, wow. That's specific. Okay.
Every now and then you get somebody that's like, specifically there's a long intro. This is the part of it I really like. And then, so, I can kind of notate in, we're going to start it like this measure for the bride, give them a little fanfare and then launch it in.
Yeah.
For my own wedding, I just like custom did all the arrangements and like I marked in all the cadence points and like. Wow. Yeah, that way there were no timing issues. I was like, whenever you see the last person is up there, play to the next asterisk, and then it will conclude beautifully.
That's a really specific kind of arranging that way.
Right.
So that's where the word is rough, because that's something that you'll never play again. You'll never have that exact All right, yeah, that's really
For
interesting.
stuff that gets used over and over again for ceremonies, I leave in the cadence points because I just use an asterisk. That's like my classic notation for that, and that
Sure.
indicates like because it's usually because it's a spot where we're cadencing on a one chord, even if it's like in the middle of a piece. It's like, or we can kind of fudge it enough. So
Mm,
I will put notations in there like this just means like your downbeat or whatever note I have it over, like hold it fermata, we're done.
right,
And
right.
then that's kind of a notation I use, but it means that my parts are very easy to play for like a gigging scenario where we're having to watch timings very carefully. Like that's a
Mm.
very different beast than doing a concert version where you play the whole thing.
Yeah, yeah, right, right.
Yeah. So that's a totally different world.
All right.
My experiences from doing strings for weddings
Mm.
like have definitely shaped how I transcribe, and like
Because
they
again, you're
gave me a lot of skills that I use for video game transcription. But then there's different, as we saw in all of these programs, there's so many interesting things happening because we are ultimately translating things that are encoded and
right,
sampled
and
and
we're translating to this specific
manipulated.
system. Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. They're manipulated in ways that are non-instrumental, right? And
Yeah.
we joke about in actually Chrono Trigger when we played, we had Doug Perry, Drum Ultima streaming with us, and Julianne Grasso joined the stream for Chrono Trigger. I think
Yeah.
was she there for FF6? I don't know. But it was early on. Julianne joined in and we kept joking about the impossible timpani, right?
And I talk about that in my Metroid paper too.
Right.
I talk about that a lot. Yep.
There's so much of
Because
that.
again, that's the transcription. The transcription is presenting you the information of what was in the game, but
Hmm.
with the arrangement, you have to make those sacrifices.
You
There's
know,
lots of there's impossible strings too. There's
yeah,
parts where
there's
it's out of
impossible
range.
everything for sure. Like the
Right,
ranges are wrong, and yeah, and things just like don't behave. The string crossings don't work.
right.
Because of the key it's in, and things like that. But yeah, I remember Doug joking that he would have like just 60 different timpani
That's exactly.
around him in a circle, and he would just
That's
run
funny.
from.
I don't think I was there for that stream, and I use the similar statement in my paper when I'm talking about how would you perform this music, and I say
Right.
something just like that. And
Multiple
probably
timpani
because I
players is probably the actual answer,
yeah
but it's
because I
also
got yeah,
prohibitively expensive to do it as it's written, right?
right, right.
So you would have to make some sacrifices, but yeah, you would probably have multiple sets.
Yeah, and I think that ties into why personally my composition has been so influenced by video game music, and the reason why I wrote terrible timpani parts when I was first writing, because I would want them to sound like what we have there, right? And you can't do chromatic timpani parts that are that all over the place. So that's kind of
Andrew,
interesting.
how much would I have to pay you
What
to
do you
sneak in the Godzilla motive? Do you mean the bump 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 bump?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of what's
Inappropriate.
that track that sampled it? Simon Says, the
Okay.
rap song.
Right, right, right.
And then there was all the litigation about it.
Yes, yes.
It is back on Spotify, I noticed,
Is
so
it really?
something
Okay.
must have been cleared up with the
I
rights.
the right. Oh, that's another can of worms. That's stuff that I discuss with people all the time too.
The
What is?
Godzilla motive. It's funny. I've had people request a lot of film music, and sometimes like things that seem very unwedding-y. Like they just like the music.
Right. I had a
Maybe the
friend.
lyrics are a bit of a depressing, but we're putting it on strings, so as long as it sounds pretty. But yeah, there will be moments where it's like, a bride's a big Lana Del Rey fan and wants to walk down the aisle to
Yeah,
Summertime Sadness, and you're like, all right.
yeah. One of my friends walked out. I think it was One Winged Angel. I think she said, and I didn't know this about her
Nice. You're
because
like, that's weird, but like,
yeah,
it's cool.
she taught at my studio. I had no idea that she was into video games, and I said I'm studying that stuff, and she's like, oh yeah, I think it was one that was her walk down song, and yeah, you never know. There's a lot of inappropriate stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I've done like ones that are surprising on their face, but they're fine and they work on strings. Like last summer, I did Best I Ever Had by Drake as a recessional.
Okay, sure.
I did Versace on the Floor by Bruno Mars also as a wedding recessional.
Wow, really?
Like
Good stuff.
sometimes you're like, oh, all right. You listen to it to do the transcription. You're like, oh, okay.
Maybe that's I don't know.
It's a process, but
Different.
yeah, it's funny. You said you wrote your own music for your wedding, right?
At my wedding, I wrote.
Ah,
I had a piece that
I love
was one
that.
of those atonal, wacky Bartok-inspired string quartets that they didn't do. But I wrote another piece, a very subtle, very like pan-diatonic kind of piece. And like I said, I don't remember it because it was played at the wedding, And we were it was like during a ceremony, we were lighting candles, and
Yeah.
and I was like, okay. And I don't know if it's in the wedding movie.
Yeah.
I
We
want to watch
didn't
that.
we didn't do a video, and nor did anybody record any of mine. I mean, I have the sheet music, but I don't have it actually as performed. I was so bizarre and customizable that
Wow.
I didn't do a string quartet. I did a string quartet, but it was 2 violas, 2 cello.
Oh, cool.
Because what I ended up doing, we got married in a very like old style cathedral, like think very ornate marble columns, stained glass, and so the space had this sort of like ancientness to it.
Oh, cool.
Where I was like, I'm gonna do all Renaissance music, so a lot of this
Do they
stuff.
play sul tasto? Do you play like like if you have them play sul tasto all the time, you get that really like dark sound? Or you do what George Crumb did. Here's another nerdy thing, and how you play on the other side.
Oh well, no, not on violins. That sounds like the Psycho soundtrack.
That's almost like no, that's the side of the but the side of the neck. If you play on the fingerboard on the other side.
Oh, yeah. I thought you meant behind the bridge.
No, yeah. You get this very
yes, yeah. And they can add mutes. They can do different things. I just liked the depth of the sound, and also because I was setting a lot of kind of Renaissance quartet, the vocal quartet music that would have been for like male presenting voices, right? So lower range overall. And then as I'm putting them in, I was just like, first of all, I'm lucky to know a lot of very good viola players and good cello players. We seem to have a lot of them in the area, and knowing that, well, I'm out because there's one violin down because I'm going to be in it. I ended up just doing, I was originally going to do, I think 3. Was I going to do 3 violas, cello? I was messing around with like different configurations, but I ended up with 2 and 2, and it was all like Claudine de Sermacy type stuff, and I've never used it again. I could easily put it on a traditional string quartet. But that's kind of the fun thing when like somebody who does weddings gets married, because it's not going to be canon in D.
No, of course not.
You know, and what they choose and how they choose to customize that is always really interesting. Even when they do more traditional stuff, it's a little bit like I Vow to Thee My Country, like that's beautiful on string. Sure. We have beautiful versions of that for strings. So you're like, yeah, it's still classic, but it's not what most people are using for. It's not Aaron the G string, it's not Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, and it's not canon.
Good. It is
so
overdone.
Ugh, I love it.
Yeah,
well, I've taken up way too much of your time.
It's fun. Yeah,
I am so happy you were able to come do this, though, because I didn't want it to just be a workshop with me. I wanted another person to bounce off the nerdiness about digging into the.
We'll do this stuff, and we need to publishing these on the internet. That's one reason I started the YouTube channel, is just like part of it just for fun. But I was like, wait, people are using these. Mm-hmm. This is useful. And I like it on YouTube just because you can listen. I like watching score videos.
Yeah,
I'll go on those, those sites and just watch, anything. And I love scores. They're just fun to look at. Mm-hmm. So that's one reason I started doing that. And I'm almost at 500 videos. So hopefully
Yay! Congrats. So let's post the links here in the chat again. So here's the VGM transcriptions channel. And then here's Gregg's website.
Oh yeah, if you want to put my
which includes you have a personal channel with your compositions on it as well. So you have those separated. So there's a second channel.
Yeah.
If you want to listen.
Different reasons.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. People are kind of coming to them for different things, and I'm seeing the Chrono Trigger stuff start to happen, and so excited for that.
I bounce back and forth because just to keep it fresh, I was looking at so I just beat Link's Awakening recently, the Game Boy version, so I want to look at that in celebration of New Link, and then I have Mega Man stuff. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
and it gets a lot of hits. People love Mega Man. It's just fun music, and then. So
yeah, I'm excited you're doing that work. So, as much as we'll probably both say, like, there's a lot to doing it yourself, regardless of what's out there. Again, it's just it's very instructive.
It's always too.
It has a way of shaping what I'm trying to say about it too, because like I already have a sense from listening, right? Like what I'm talking about with this topic, but there's something about putting it into notation, especially as like an active performer, that just reframes everything for me. Like I see things that I'm like, there it is.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't able to put it into words, but that's what's happening. And I think that that's a very useful skill to cultivate in oneself. But that said, like there are great resources, you know, just to get you started. There are things like VG Lead Sheets is generally a lead sheet, so it's just melody with chords.
Right.
Which can be
I've
really
used it.
useful for especially performing and things like that. But you know, there are times and places where you're like, I need to know what's happening in every single channel. And it's really good to kind of seek this out. And I'm so glad that you're starting to put more of that up, because a lot of times if you search for sheet music of the video games, they are designed more for, I want to play this on piano, or, you know, they are more performer arrangements.
And there's so much, and there's a lot of the same, you know, how many Garuda Valleys I've seen, you know, how many kids want to play that on guitar, and there's just versions of that in different keys.
Yeah.
And it's like, I want the original, you know.
Yeah. So I'm really happy to see this kind of nerdier approach to, like, really as exacting as we can be. I mean, we're both, you know, even talking about like the noise channel, like it's not like I just started that way. I have some noise channel transcriptions from earlier in my process, and I'm like, I would go back and do that very differently now, because ultimately it is a translation process, right? We are translating things that do not always completely map neatly.
Yeah.
And that's a real fun skill to cultivate. But I love seeing more of this, where like figuring out almost like the best practices between folks like us of like, how am I going to notate these timbral changes? And you know, it's white noise, but it sounds pitched. And so how are we going to imply that with the drum set notation? Like, I like that this is an evolving process, because this is a side, like, yes, we are talking about the games in a more zoomed out macro view and moving the discourse forward, but there's like a specific transcription discourse that I'm excited to see grow more robust amongst those of us that are super into it.
Right.
So you're definitely a leader in this space, certainly having the wherewithal to put it up.
Right. I wonder who else is, you know, in one of us that's doing this. So yeah.
So connecting more folks in. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll have you back on to discuss your brand new article.
That'd be awesome. Yes.
Maybe in the fall, once I get through the summer of summers.
Summer. That's great. I love it.
But yeah, thank you so much for your time and all of the brilliant demonstrations, just pulling stuff up and moving windows, and it was a lot of fun. So cool. Thank you so much for that. I don't remember what we're doing next week, so don't ask. Somebody else it might be Brent and TJ. It's somebody from the animation book.
Sure.
Ryan, I have to do Ryan still. I have a recorded conversation with Lisa about like the actual editing for the book and that whole process between us. I think the next couple weeks are devoted to the animation book, but I could be wrong. So stay tuned. I will tweet. I will hopefully update my Discord. Have a wonderful Friday, everybody. Bye.
See ya.